In this tutorial, we're going to talk about how we can take your core stability to the next level. We know core strength and core stability is slightly different, so we are going to be focusing on core stability. So first of all, we're going to talk about what core stability is. Then we're going to talk about some anatomy that makes up core stability, or the anatomy of core stability. And then finally, we are going to look at some typical exercises that you can start doing to take it up and refine and improve and take that core stability to the next level. Before we get into that, I just quickly want to mention, wherever you're watching this, please do like, follow and subscribe. You can also leave comments, questions and any feedback in the comment section below. More than happy to answer any questions that you may have. And alternatively, you can look at the link in the description and you can go through to my core stability online training program. Part number one and question number one. What is core stability? Well, it's very different to core strength. Core strength is holding a posture and your ability to hold that posture. When we talk about core stability, what we're focusing on is the smoothness of movement. So it's the timing of the muscles and the smoothness of the movement. So we're not necessarily talking about the big global, powerful force production muscles. We're talking about the smaller, more refined muscles. Most people call them the stabilising muscles. So the smaller muscles around the joint. They're a bit like dampeners. They keep the muscle, or they keep the joint moving smoothly, whilst the bigger muscles can produce the power to send them in the direction that they want to go. And the smaller muscles are there just to keep that smooth and keep it going in the direction that they want to go, so there's no buckling of joints or whatever it may be. Question number two is, what does core stability training look like? As I've mentioned, core strength is different. It's about holding a posture. So we might look at planks, side planks, bridges as a starting point for core stability. Core strength. When we talk about core stability, we're talking more about the challenging of posture and alignment. So there's a balance element to it. We want the exercise to be unstable enough that it's challenging your posture and the position that you're in. So that when it comes to doing it, you're having to stay in the correct posture whilst your body wants to move around. And we can do this in two ways. We can do it starting off in a static posture, so we can then get to grips with the balance element to it. And then we can move on to into replicating everyday movements, but making sure we focus on the quality of that movement. So again, keeping the movement smooth as we go through. So it could be something simple like a squat. So we're keeping the movement smooth as we go down and smooth as we go up. And we haven't got the buckling of the knees as we go up and down. But we might just start with something static, like a half kneeling posture, just to get used to challenging the posture and being able to maintain the correct alignment. Now we've talked a little bit about what core stability is. What we're now going to focus on is the anatomy of it. So we're going to cover 4 parts of your anatomy. We're going to cover the cerebellum, which is a part of the brain that's just at the back here. We're going to look at the vestibular system. We're going to look at proprioceptors, and then we're going to look at the visual system. In part 2 of the tutorial, we're going to be focusing on the anatomy. As I mentioned, we're focusing on 4 parts. And part number 1 is the cerebellum here. So it's positioned at the back of the head. So as you can see here, you've got the main sort of part of the brain that we all know and recognise. Then you've got the brainstem that goes into a few other parts, but eventually further down it turns into the spine, which is down here. And then you have all the various nerves coming in and out of it. So we are focusing on the cerebellum, which is, as I mentioned, positioned at the back of the head. It's the movement and balance control center. So it's receiving messages from the inner ear, vestibular system, the eyes, the visual system, and the muscles and the joints, which are your proprioceptors that lie within the muscles, the joints, the tendons, the fascia. What it then does is interprets all that information and then sends messages to the muscles to then go about performing that movement. So, for example, if we are going to walk along a balance beam, what the eyes are doing, they're looking at the balance beam, so it's preparing. Then when you put your foot on the balance beam, obviously the eyes are doing their job, but then the vestibular system and the muscles and joints come into it, because the vestibular system is then taking in certain information, which we're going to talk about in a second, and then the muscles and the joints are doing the same. That's then sending messages all the way up to the cerebellum here. Once it's interpreted how unstable the surface is and how well your muscles are communicating, it then sends out the motor signals to then go and perform the movement. So if you've got good motor control, the movement will be smooth. If you've got poor motor control, it will be very jerky and unbalanced. So that's something to be mindful of when talking about core stability, which will be a bit more specific to that as we get towards the end when we talk more about the exercises. The second part to this is the vestibular system. Now, the vestibular system is in the inner ear. So it's this little piece here. And you can see there are these little sort of tubes that are in sort of like a circular shape. Now, it's these tubes that are the, let's just say, the main part of it. So it provides information about motion, head position, and spatial orientation. It's also involved in motor control. So that's essentially how we control our movement, balance, stability of the head, body, and posture. Now, how it works is these little tubes, they contain small crystals that stimulates little tiny hairs, and so as the crystals move across the hairs, that's essentially your body's way of saying my head is moving in this position, or my body's moving in that position, or I'm in this posture. So these all go in different directions, so depending on where the hair or where the crystals go will depend on how the body responds, or how the brain interprets it and how it responds. And as it says here, this information goes to the brain, gets interpreted, and then it goes, again, as I mentioned before, it goes out to the muscles to be able to then perform that movement. And the better the quality of information coming in, the better the quality of information going out. So having a good quality vestibular system is going to be helpful, which we're going to cover how we do that in a second. The third part of your anatomy is proprioception. So you may have heard of this before, and essentially it's perception and awareness of your body and movement. Now, these sensors are within muscles, tendons, and fascia. So you've got stretch receptors, which you can see here, which are known as muscle spindles. You've also got receptors in the tendons called Golgi tendon organs. Now, they're doing different things. We're just going to focus on the muscle spindles because they're talking about changes in length of a muscle. So it can tell whether the muscle's getting longer and extending, and it can also tell when it's contracting. So that then, in some respects, comes towards our movement. So muscles getting longer and shorter, contraction, relaxation, so on and so forth. But essentially what's happening, so if we use the foot as the example, so again, we'll talk about that balance beam. So we're on a balance beam, and you've got all these muscles down here. So let's just use the lower leg as the example because we're on a balance beam. So you've got all these muscles down here twitching, trying to keep the foot stable so you can stay on this balance beam and essentially not fall off. So all this information is coming from these muscles, and it's just, again, following all this round into the spinal cord, up to the cerebellum, does its interpretation, works it all out, and then it comes back down the motor nerves, back down to the muscles to tell the muscle what it wants it to do. So you've got certain receptors going away from the muscle spindles, going up to the brain saying, this is what's happening. And then you've got the brain going, okay, I understand what's happening. What I'm now going to do is I'm either going to freeze and stand still because I don't have good stability, or I'm going to step forward because I've got good stability and I'm going to carry on the movement. And then if it's nice and smooth, that will be good proprioception and good stability through the ankle. So that's part number 2, proprioception. The final part is the visual system. This system is all about the eyes. So it's taking in information through the eyes. So the information is sort of being read in the outer world, and then all the information's coming in. Again, you can see the vestibular system back here, which interacts with it, and then again that will go into the brain. I'm just going to say into here, so all the information is sort of coming into the brain, or coming through the eyes into the brain in here, and then it's going back out down to the muscles to go and tell it what it wants it to do. Now, this is the important bit, and I'm going to bring all this together when we talk about the exercise in the next section. Now, the visual system, half to 2/3 of the brain is used for visual processing. Now, this isn't just for movement, that's just as a general term. So what it's basically saying is this is a very dominant system of the body, or sensory system of the body. And it can override other senses. So it can override and dominate the vestibular system and the proprioceptive system. So it's a very simple idea that we're talking about when it comes to core stability, which is essentially closing your eyes. Because what we are then able to do is we take this dominant, so it can override other senses, we take that out of the equation. So we just focus on the vestibular system and the muscles, or the proprioceptors, I should say, because it's not just in the muscles. So in a sense, we take this out of the equation and we just focus on these two here. So what it causes us to do is it causes our body to heighten how much these can work and how much these have to work. So it's a very simple way of improving core stability, which is essentially just closing your eyes whilst you do certain exercises. And we're going to talk about certain exercises next. Now, I am going to be focusing on core stability. So that's basically the spine, the hips and the shoulders. So we're going to be focusing on that area. The examples I've used before is more sort of, yes, the core is involved, but it's more so ankle stability with walking on a balance beam. So when we close our eyes, or it can be as simple as just turning away from a mirror. Because then again, when you're using the mirror, what you're doing is you're using the eyes, looking at yourself in the mirror, looking at where your knees are, looking at where your feet are, looking at where your arms are. So your eyes are essentially taking in all that information, relaying it to the brain, and then the brain is sending it out. If you turned yourself away from the mirror, that can change because you can't see everything going on. You have to read it with your vestibular system, with how it all feels, and then all the muscles come online, the joints come online, all the senses within those parts of the body all come online and have to work and become more dominant. So what we're going to look at next, or what we're going to talk about next really, are certain exercises, when you can use them, and how you can go about improving your core stability and taking it to the next level with certain exercises. Obviously, I've mentioned certain bits already by turning away from a mirror or closing your eyes during certain exercises. What are the exercises that you want to be focusing on when we're talking about core stability? Well, I always like to start simple and then progress. So I'm not going to be throwing people in at the deep end and saying, go and do this elaborate exercise, because it's the only way to improve your core stability. There are very simple ways to improve core stability, again, depending on the skill level that you're at. So there are exercises. So a very simple one to start with is the bird dog, where you're on all fours and then you extend your, let's just say your right arm and your left leg. So essentially, the only contact point you have is your left arm and your right knee on the floor. So you're on all fours, you extend your right arm, right leg. Now, for some people, even with their eyes open, that might be enough. They might be wobbly. So we would start there. Now, as you start improving, so you can keep the eyes open and you can bring the hands narrower. So essentially what we're doing is we're making the base narrower, which is making the exercise more unstable. So that's going to be a start point to improving core stability. So that is, in some respects, that's a prerequisite to what we're talking about. So you want to be, let's just say, proficient at doing that. Once you've become narrow with your eyes open, it can then be very useful to then go slightly wider again, but close your eyes and just take that visual system out of the equation. And then what you're then able to do is eventually just keep bringing your hands narrower, narrower, narrower. But what we want to be focusing on is level hips and level shoulders as we do it. So we start on all fours, we extend right arm and left leg. We would then hold that, so we would be on all fours, we would close our eyes, we would extend right arm and left leg. We would then hold that to focus on keeping the shoulders and the hips nice and level. There might be some wobble, but we want to be holding that until we can stabilise the wobble. If we can't stabilise the wobble, then we need to possibly regress, go to a slightly wider base until it starts to level off. So we would start there. Again, as the exercise then starts to become more stable, we would then bring the hands in closer together and then possibly hold it for a little bit longer. But then we would alternate right arm, left leg, left arm, right leg. So we would alternate between the two of those. So that would be a nice easy start point, because we've got, first of all, we've got 4 points of contact, and then we're going out to 2 points of contact, which is the hand and the knee. And in some respects, you've got the foot at the back, which is essentially a third point of contact. Then we can go up into a half kneeling position. So this is essentially being on one knee. Now again, if you can imagine, that's my knee, and we would have the foot. So we would have a bit of a space between them. So we would have the back knee here and the front foot here. Over time, we would then bring them a little bit more onto a tightrope. That is then going to make the exercise more unstable. What we would then do is, once we are stable here, once we're narrow and we're stable, we would then close the eyes, focus on the balance. You can then do certain things with your arms, put your arms overhead, because that's going to shift your centre of gravity. So we would possibly then put hands overhead, again, keep the eyes closed and focus on maintaining the balance. Then if you wanted to, you could then bring in a balance beam where you're balancing on one knee on the balance beam, so on and so forth. Or if you wanted to bring a bosu in, but that would be a little bit more difficult to do that. But that would be the type of progression that you would go through. So that's 2 very simple exercises to work on core stability. And again, what I mean by that is hip, spine, shoulder. By going down onto the knees, you take the ankle out of the equation, so it becomes a lot more hip stability, and then you get the spine stability that comes with that. And then again, with the hand on the floor, you get shoulder stability. There will be obviously a bit of wrist, but you get the shoulder stability as well. When you come up onto the half kneeling position, which is just up on one knee, what you then get, again, is more of the hip stability, because there's only one knee on the floor and one foot on the floor. So the ankle stability goes out of the equation a little bit. So those would be 2 easy exercises to start with, the bird dog and a half kneeling position. So that's on all fours, extending opposite arm and leg, and then on one knee with one foot on the floor, and then holding the balance. So just focusing on that. Another interesting exercise for core stability is a squat. Now, a squat where you have both feet parallel to each other, and then you squat down. Now, what I recommend for this is to have your heels on the floor. So that might be barefoot, or certainly at least in a trainer. Try not to raise your heels up using a wedge or anything like that, or an external wedge that isn't your trainer, because trainers do have a degree of wedge to it. So we can use the squat. Now again, it's making the squat be smooth. So going down in a straight line, keeping knees in position, managing the position of the upper spine and the head as well. But again, it's keeping that smooth on the way down, smooth on the way up, focusing on keeping feet parallel and knees wide. If you experience any wobbling through the knees, then that's to do with the hip, the stability of the hip. If you're having trouble with keeping the feet in, that can also be trouble with the hips, but there's going to be some ankle involvement with that. So that's again something to be mindful of when it comes to core stability. But that's something slightly different. Now this would be an exercise where I would turn them away from the mirror first. Keep the eyes open, turn away from the mirror so they can't see what their body's doing. Obviously, when that becomes more proficient, then it might be a time to close the eyes. But essentially, what we are looking to do is take exercises, make them slightly more unstable. Once we are stable with the eyes open, close the eyes to make them more unstable, or to make the body more unstable, not necessarily the exercise itself, but make the body more unstable, so you can, in a sense, improve the smoothness of your movement by the smaller muscles being able to track the joints on where they want them to go and hold the body in a smooth and stable position. So to quickly summarise what we've talked about, what is core stability? It's that smoothness of movement whilst maintaining proper alignment. The areas or the anatomy that we've talked about is the cerebellum, which is the master controller of everything. Then we've got the vestibular system, which is in the inner ear, which again is feeding information about posture, head position, so on and so forth. Feeds into the brain, and then it comes out to the muscles to do the necessary movement. Along with that, we've got muscle proprioceptors, which are in muscles, joints and fascia. Again, they're sending feedback to the cerebellum and the brain, or the central nervous system, to then interpret and then send information out to the muscles to produce the necessary movement. And then finally, the visual system is doing exactly the same thing, but this is the more dominant one. So if we can take that one out of the equation by either turning away from a mirror or closing our eyes, then we're going to be in a much better position to be able to improve the stability through the hip, the spine and the shoulder, using exercises like a bird dog, like a half kneeling posture, and possibly, if we come to it, a more dynamic exercise like the squat. So many thanks for watching. My name is Chris from Christopher Holt Training. I will speak to you in a future tutorial.